Started then. Welcome everyone to the Planning Commission meeting for the City of Blue Lake. This is Monday, November 18th, 7 o'clock, starting at 7:02. And do you want to establish a quorum first, staff? Commissioner Hogan. Present.
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 Absent is Great, so we have a quorum. We'll go ahead and move forward. The first agenda item is approval of the minutes from our October 28th, 2024 special meeting. Did everyone have a chance to review the minutes? Is there any public comment on the minutes? Oh, no? No public comment? Okay, then is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve. Second.
Second. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. We've approved the minutes. The second item on our agenda is public input. The public is invited to present petitions, make announcements, or provide other information to the Planning Commission that is relevant to the scope of authority of the City of Blue Lake that is not on the agenda. The Planning Commission may provide up to 15 minutes for this public input session, and to assure that each individual presentation is heard, the Planning Commission may uniformly impose time limitations of 3 minutes to each individual presentation. The public will be given the opportunity to address items that are on the agenda at the time the Planning Commission takes up each specific agenda item. So is there anyone here for public comment for something that's not on the agenda? Yeah, please come on up. And do we have our timer? This is only less than 2 minutes. Oh, sure. No problem. But just, yeah.
That's what they all
Yeah,
say.
no, we'll get our timer going
I'm excited.
just for everybody, to be fair. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm Marty Granger. I'm presenting a project tonight to commission in hopes of interest and a desire to listen. The project is small, not too much time or money, but may seem a bother or even quite funny. Enough of this relish, let's get on to the meat. It's all about Greenwood, our lovely new street. This charming new entrance is our chance to present our values, our focus, and logical intent. Let's start on the left with the new signs for the streets that proceed in the order that sanity keeps. The start would be A Street, and then, of course, B. C Street would follow, but what about D? D Street is short, but most important of all, for that's where resides the fire department hall. But it also serves as the pivotal point, you see, to connect after the curve with streets E, F, and G. This may all seem like some superficial chatter, and to many this really won't seem to matter. But I do believe, though it's hard to explain, that order in the physical can seep into the brain. Our city can always use help to stay smart, to allow order and harmony into our heart. So I bring this gently, not to offend you, but in hopes it appears on a coming agenda. So, do you know what I'm talking about? Do you have any questions?
That was lovely.
Thank you. So you understand what I'm saying. So over there.
Great. All right. And Julie, I see you on Zoom for public comment.
Thank you, Planning Commission. Julie
Oh,
Christie.
hold on just a second, Julie. We can't quite hear you. Hold
That's why I'm
on.
doing
It
public
might be on
comment.
our end, Julie. Just a second.
Okay.
Okay, what about now? Go ahead and try and let's see.
How's it going?
Yes. Yep, we've got you now.
Cool.
Go ahead, Julie.
Okay, yes, thank you. My main reason for comment was just to make sure that connection was good tonight. I just caught the end of, I'm assuming, Marty's poem. That was cute, Marty, very cute. Thank you, Planning Commission, and I hope we got a lot of public in the house tonight.
Great. Thank you, Julie. All right, is there anyone else for public comment on something that's not already on the agenda? Nope. All right, seeing none, we'll close public comment and move on to item 3, approval of the agenda for tonight. How does it look?
Second.
Yeah, is there any public comment? Yeah.
5 and 6 of the North Front.
Thanks. So, anybody have any? No? Okay. Sure. Okay, so we need a revised motion.
All right, I motion to move items 5 and 6. Do the 6 first, the 5 second.
Great. All those in favor? Aye. Great. So we have an approved agenda. So we will go to number 4. We have a vote on chair and vice chair. We were just wanting clarification on this. Do we not already have a chair and vice chair? I know we have some new members. We were curious about this on the agenda.
So the chair that was previously nominated was Robert Chapman,
Oh, right.
and the vice chair was Court Pryor.
Okay.
So with Robert, resigning from the commission, and we were left without a chair. We were having the vice chair do it. So we figured, since we basically have a full commission, that would be a good time to vote on chair and vice chair. One option, if you want to wait till there's more commissioners here, postpone this to a later meeting. And you guys could choose among you who want to function as chair.
Okay.
I've also had to find a meeting. But
Great.
how do you get
Yeah. No, I'm
as
feel
chair?
comfortable with that. Yeah.
I did talk with Commissioner Pryor too, and he seemed to be okay to stay in the second position as well.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Great.
Yes, so chair.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. All right, it passes. Thank you. Happy to be the chair. Great.
you.
Public comment. We need public comment on this. We should go that forward. Oh, well, there's no change in vice chair,
Yeah.
right? It's already,
His court,
so
he's
I think,
already there.
yeah. But we do need to take public comment. Forgot that step. Is there any public comment on chair and vice chair? All right. Okay, great. Well then moving on now to our slightly amended agenda that we approved. We're gonna receive a presentation from city staff regarding potential development of a portion of the former Blue Lake Power Site for battery storage, formerly item number 6, which is now number 5.
Do you want me to take this? Right? Okay. Thank you. I wanted to introduce Richard Engel too from Redwood Coast Energy Authority, formerly of the Shots Lab. He's been a true pioneer in our local green energy development. I first met him years ago when I worked for the Yurok Tribe when they were doing the hydrogen fuel cell up at Schoolhouse Peak and all the work that Shots Energy Lab was doing to really move forward renewables. So it's exciting that our community has had a lot of very talented people that have really been kind of at the forefront of those initiatives. As the commission probably knows, the city has taken over control of the former Blake Power site. That site has always maintained its ownership with the city, but we did have a lease for well over 35 years with Blue Lake Power, which kind of went through several iterations. To operate the former biomass plant. In April of 2024, the city formally evicted Blake Power from the site and took over full ownership and management of the property and the existing infrastructure. And as you may or may not know, because we have some new commissioners, which is exciting, the city's been working for a number of years to try and put ourselves in a position to have a plan and be ready to implement at the time that we did take over management of that property, including looking at options for cleanup and options to take advantage of some of the existing infrastructure on the site, including the transformer and substation, to look at a battery storage project. So we've done a lot of work over the last number of years. We received funding from EDA to look at recreation investment, including an RV park and campground. That project was all designed with the idea that we could, in the future, attract a battery storage project. So knowing that battery storage at the scale that we're looking at is compatible with various applications, including residential development, commercial development, and industrial and recreation. We designed the RV park and campground with that intent. So we've been fortunate to have some interest in the power plant. Our CEA, we've been working with their team for a number of years as well to evaluate opportunities to transition the site. We've actually entered into a memorandum of understanding with RCEA, I think it's a couple years ago now, to assist the city in evaluating projects and ideas and concepts. They were really the expertise in this arena, and it was something that the city, it definitely isn't in my wheelhouse to have a full understanding of all of the opportunities with renewables. So we've been working with RCEA to look at energy solutions and ways that the city can not only clean up the site but continue to participate in kind of the green energy um, development, be part of a solution that could provide benefit not only to our community but to our region. And so Richard is here also tonight to kind of help answer any questions and kind of talk about what battery storage is, how it interacts with our CEA's portfolio and their kind of their mission of um, creating opportunities to source more renewable energy for our CEA's customer base. Um, we also have a company called Power Transitions that's presented a proposal to the city. They are a very well funded energy company that has a lot of experience. They have a lot of experience in renewable systems, including solar and battery. They also have done wind and hydro on large scales. Um, and they are very interested in the property because we have the existing infrastructure. If we didn't have structure, if we didn't have that transformer and substation, I doubt that they would be talking to Blue Lake. Maybe they would, I don't know. Maybe it'd be for something different like solar or something, but those projects are large scale projects. So really the attractant, for the city is that infrastructure. And that's really, like I said, what we've been kind of banking on this whole time, thinking that that might be um, the infrastructure that helps us transition that site and kind of frees up our future for, kind of the next iteration of our economic future. So Power Transitions has been in contact with the city. We've toured the site numerous times. They've talked with our CEA about, what their position in this kind of regional project could be. Our CEA is going to be putting out a solicitation in the near future, and Power Transitions is interested in applying for that proposal. What they're proposing for the city is to purchase 6 acres of land. The 6 acres that the city had sectioned out for development of the battery storage. They are proposing to purchase that against the cost of the cleanup of the full site, and then the city would be paid the residuals. So if the site appraises for 1.5 million, the site cleanup is a million, the city gets the 500,000 that we can reinvest into a project, into the city. The site gets cleaned up, they handle all the demo, and we are at that point pretty much freed up to move forward with future development. Um, the I think the site has a lot of value, and I think it'll appraise for a good amount, which would be really good for the city. We own quite a bit of property over on that side, over 20 acres, and like I said, going into the development concepts of the RV park and campground and all the ancillary development, we had already kind of subtracted out that acreage. So essentially, I know there's been some pushback over the years about selling property. The city is leasing the property to Danco for the Bottawatt project. So that we're still retaining that. We have the bike park property. Um, we would be, retaining ownership of the residual of the parcel if the 6 acres was pulled out. We are talking about selling the corporation yard for development. That's another property that really lends itself to a sale because you're trying to attract a developer, and they need the equity in the land to be able to finance. So leasing, does become hard. The city has a lot of property. We are a pretty big landlord in the community. When you think about all of our park space, we just acquired the town square a few years ago. We have all of, Perigo Park and the horse arena and basketball courts and the new bike park. So we've got a lot of land, and it's not necessarily easy to be a landlord. We do have one commercial property that we rent out for chocolate factory. I wouldn't say we're the best landlord. It doesn't really lend itself to being, a great landlord. We have public works that can do some things, but it's not necessarily in our comfort level to be managing properties and tenants and evictions and all of these things. Um, in looking at ways to leverage the property to get the most benefit for the community. I feel strongly that the sale of the 6 acres is really in the city's best interest and is a really great opportunity. Um, the company would be interested in leasing the property, but they would want us to clean it up. So no one's going to go in and spend over $1 million to clean up your property and then rent it from you at the same time. That would be kind of awkward. Be like, being a landlord and being like, sure, rent my house, but oh, and by the way, it's really a mess and you need to clean it up and also pay me rent. So, it just doesn't make sense at that point. Battery storage is it's something that's been around for a really long time. Some of you may even have a battery storage at your home. If you have solar, you may have a Tesla wall that in your own home to store energy. It's kind of the gap when you think about renewables as we're producing this energy source during the day when wind and solar and everything is really producing. We're failing to secure that energy through storage. And so it's kind of a loss. And so batteries allow you to capture the renewables and then send them back into the system. And Richard could probably speak to that in a more articulate manner than I can. It's just kind of how my brain thinks. It's like, it's why lose it when we can grab it and store it and then send it back out. So there's a lot of benefits to it. Resiliency, kind of equalizing demand. So you're not having these big, huge peaks. It's like they tell us it used to be like, do your laundry at night. Now it's like, no, do it during the day because all the renewables are on and that's the cheaper time. So everyone's trying to juggle, when to do, the most energy intensive activities. So this would kind of allow that to equalize and balance a little bit. There are some battery facilities already in our community. The Rancheria has, you said it was over a megawatt or a couple megawatts, maybe? Yeah, so the Rancheria has a megawatt solar or battery pack. It's located at the back of their hotel. Um, I I think St. Joe's has a battery pack for the hospital. There's a battery storage for the new microgrid at the airport. There's literally thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of battery projects across the globe. They are being put in residential areas. They're being put in by schools. They're being put in commercial and industrial applications. So it's kind of a it seems kind of like a new technology, but it's actually been around for quite a while. And now it's becoming more scalable to our household applications as well. So now we're starting to be much more familiar. There's been concerns, there's always the concerns about fires with batteries. Um, the batteries that are being proposed with power transitions are the lithium iron phosphate batteries. So it's kind of the newer technology, seems to be way less susceptible to kind of the thermal runaway that seems to be kind of what creates the fire issue. These are all in self-contained storage units. I think they're like 6 feet wide by 24 feet long. Um, and they have their own fire suppression. They have their own fan systems. They're relatively quiet. The industrial park down there had a lot of activity for a long time. We have gravel, we had biomass, we have all these things, and then we transitioned to the business park and started kind of pulling back a little bit. And then we transitioned into the Powers Creek district and are really looking to like less intensify those more industrial applications. So we do have zoning that talks about decibel levels and noise and, other intrusions, lighting. Lighting's a big one. You guys worked really hard to look at lighting, the international dark skies limitations so that we weren't, sending a lot of light pollution out. So you have a lot of those controls as well. Um, so we brought this to council last week and we're kind of at a weird time right now because we don't really know about council. And so they felt uncomfortable about making a decision until, we knew like if we were going to have a new council, giving them time to, get some feel for this. And it's kind of brand new, but the what the company is asking for is to enter into an exclusive negotiating agreement and to be able to pursue an option to purchase. It doesn't require the city to have an end purchase, but it does require that we negotiate in good faith through a process. And so that's really what the city is, what we're trying to get to at this point is at least let's get to the table, let's get a negotiating team to really delve into this. I know that there's some community concerns. Um, and this came to be talking about this all in kind of like someday, and then all of a sudden you get a project. As a project manager, that's really exciting because I feel like that's just like, hey, we've been on this route, we've been working really hard doing the right thing, and boom, someone really, someone sees the value of it and we got a project. For the community, it can feel like, oh wow, this just got thrown in our face and we didn't really know a lot about this. So I get that where there's, there needs to be some comfort level and people need to learn about it. um, so Richard was, really gracious at last minute to be able to come and give you guys some more information. We're trying to make this presentation, get this word out, talk to community members. I had people calling today that it was great. If people want to come in, see it, talk about it, get more information, call the guy. Jeff's really good at talking. I know Kit's reached out to Jeff to get more information. So that's great. That way we can kind of dispel, any rumors and make sure that people are actually getting really good, solid information. So I don't know if you have any questions for me, but that's kind of where we're at right now. And, if Richard has, some time to kind of talk to us a little bit more and maybe answer some questions, I'm really excited he's here because, like I said, I'm not an expert at this by any means. So that is what I have for you. Or if you have any questions or you want to turn it over to Richard to talk.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, probably.
It seems like this would be our quickest and best route to like get that dismantled as well, correct?
Yes. So we have pushed really hard and let this company know that our goal is to have this dismantled in 2025. We would like to go to demo in the spring. And they have agreed to that. So we've taken 3 demolition companies through to look at the site. Um, Honestly, the site is an absolute disaster. Um, it's it's so far beyond like my capacity to even like manage or to think about managing in any responsible way without some massive infusion of cash. There's just no way around it. The facility is falling apart. Before we got it, it had been thoroughly vandalized. It has had every wire stripped from it. Every window is broken. Everything inside is smashed. There's pieces of it falling because it hasn't been maintained for so long. And then, not to mention, we have a massive chip pile that the last estimate we had for a company just to look at hauling it away to pay someone was like $60 million. So it's so astronomical, so we have to figure out what do we do with this. And having this company, there are some options though. The good thing is the plant's pretty small. It looks really large because it takes up a big footprint. Plant itself is pretty small. And talking to some of these demo crews, they're like, we could lay this thing down in probably 3 to 5 days. And then, we'll come in and cut it up and, package it to be hauled out. The chip pile is probably our biggest hurdle. We do have an opportunity, though, working with some of our local farmers. It's great material to be able to spread on your fields, and some of the USDA had some programs for carbon sequestration. So that could be an opportunity. We've had several ranchers who are interested in it, but of course they want us to haul it for them. So, that's kind of that's a big hurdle. There's a lot of material there. I mean, we could literally have free mulch for probably the next 30 years for everyone in Blue Lake and still probably not make a dent. So we're happy to take some of the best part of it and go make a free mulch pile for all the community members. We'll probably be spreading mulch everywhere in the park and every landscaping thing that we can find, but at the end of the day, it's an industrial size cleanup. So, like I said, it's something we've been planning for through this whole process. It just so happens that, we had a pretty good plan in place, I think. It's kind of like the Powers Creek district, and we did all this work and then we got a project and we are like, hey, that's exactly what we had, written the zone for, to try and get a project like this. So, it makes me feel comfortable that we're on the right track. And like I said, working with RTA has been really critical to making sure that we are, part of a solution and not creating another community problem out there. So, yeah, so hope that answers that question.
So on the cleanup part, so I think I misunderstood a little bit. So you said, so somebody would come in, they get 6 acres that we would sell. They would clean up that piece and
They would clean up the whole site.
whole site.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
So phase 2 is the 12 meg or the 100 MW installation, but the cleanup is of everything. I think what will happen is, honestly, is that, I mean, we just have to be honest. I think they'll come in and clean up this the main plant, and then it's going to take us a little longer to try and figure out those chips. They've been doing a lot of calling and trying to find, resources and stuff, and so um, no one really wants it locally. I like West Green, they'd be like, oh my God, this is like enough mulch for decades, so it's such a large amount. We could get rid of small amounts of it and keep chipping away at it while we're working towards a larger solution as well. So, yeah, I know, right? I didn't even think about that. Sorry. Yeah, it's on the remaining. Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, and it's
Yeah.
not burnable to be transported over to the other
We've
one?
talked, they've actually reached out to some of the other, the cogen plants, and it's sat there for a long time. And they've got all their own material, they're trying to keep up with different mills and stuff too. So yeah, that's what we were hoping. We're like, hey, you guys want it? Like, we'll give it to you. Like, just come and take it. So, so far, no takers. Like I said, I think it's going to be a multifaceted approach and solution. So it's going to be a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and hopefully a lot of something else. But ultimately, right now, as it sits, the city does not have the money or the resources to be able to clean up or manage that plant. I mean, we're and I'm sure everyone has heard that there was a potential electrocution over there on the site. People have been breaking in, stealing, stripping everything. I've been just super worried about kids. I mean, I've been chasing everyone out of there that we can. We are talking about having someone move on site just to keep an eye on the place, but we don't have the resources. I mean, it would take a full-time security guard to walk the perimeter of that thing. As soon as we fix a hole in the fence, someone cuts a hole somewhere else. So it's just ongoing. We have talked with our risk managers. We took our risk managers through there immediately upon taking possession, and they said it's all fenced, so that's good. We put up all the signage. They're like, there's only so much you can do. If something happens, it really minimizes your risk. But who wants to think that someone got hurt on their property? And it's just going to get worse. I mean, I've got to take Humboldt County, their hazardous environmental health department people over tomorrow. I'm just not looking forward to that. Uh, so that'll be great. I'm sure they're gonna, be really concerned about everything that's, spilled on the ground, everything that's, laying everywhere. One of the opportunities that we have with the selling the city corporation yard is the family wants to buy it also owns Humboldt Sanitation. So as part of the land purchase, we're recommending taking off an amount of money for cleanup of the corporation yard and then helping us move our public works group over to the power plant site and cleaning up one of the main buildings over there. So we've planned for public works to transition over to that site because even if you have an RV park and campground, you're going to need maintenance stuff. You need lawnmowers, you need, rock and different things. So we'd always kind of figured that area would be like batteries, maintenance, and that way it's a real easy way to be able to kind of buffer it with either landscaping. We'd always kind of plan a parking area because we had talked early on with the battery projects about being able to put some Tesla chargers or some kind of charging station. So, that could be an attractant for people coming to Blue Lake. Hey, come off the 299, come into Blue Lake, eat lunch, go for a walk while your car charges here. So, just kind of thinking of ways to kind of pair all of this together. So, but that's where we're at right now. And yeah, and at some point, if you guys want to take a tour of it, I'd be happy to take you over there and kind of get a feel for it. It's pretty overwhelming when to see it in all of its glory, and just to really see what we're up against. So,
Richard?
oh, at the podium.
Yeah, I mean, make it official. All right. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, I'm Richard Engel, Director of Power Resources at Redwood Coast Energy Authority. So, RCEA has been around since 2003, and I got hired in 2016 when they decided to launch the Community Choice Energy Program. So, when people ask me what I do for a living, in the fewest words I can think of, I just say I apply and sell electricity. Because we have like one part of the team that I oversee is working on procuring energy for our community choice aggregation or community choice energy program. And then we have another kind of sub team that does the customer facing functions, just answering the phones, helping people out with their electric bills and explaining that we're not an extra charge on their bill, and all those things. Um, and so, yeah, on the power procurement side, we have, a strategic plan that calls for maximizing how much of our energy that we sell to the public in Humboldt comes from renewable sources, and and making that as affordable as we can and as reliable as we can, as clean as we can. And then we also have a charge to make as much of that as possible local. So just because of kind of the economic necessities and regulatory necessities that we're up against, we have had to enter into some contracts for projects that are not local. And an exciting milestone is this Friday will be the official commercial operating date for this 100 megawatt solar project in Kern County. Um, that we entered into contract for back in 2020, and it was supposed to be online by 2022, but with the pandemic, supply chain problems, even issues with importing equipment from China that was under the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act, and all kinds of things that project came up against. It unfolded more slowly than expected, but it's finally hitting the finish line. But, these days it's considered very bad form in the energy business to just build solar projects because you get more and more of that big hump in the middle of the day of generation. And California grid is actually oversaturated with that now. It's come to where there's like, you know, many, many megawatts of electricity that's getting curtailed in the middle of the day, just denied access to the grid because we don't know what to do with it, because the the one really hard fact of the electric grid is that you have to have exactly as much supply as load at any given time. It can't be a watt more or a watt less. It has to be exactly right. And that's the real challenge of operating the grid. And so, uh, so getting storage in the mix is critically important. And so, realizing that a couple of years ago, we got into negotiations to add energy storage onto that big project in Kern County. So now it's lagging about a year behind the solar, but we will by about this time next year have a similarly sized storage facility online there too. So none of that is local, unfortunately, but it is going to serve about 45% of our customer load, which is great because that's a huge leap forward in getting a long-term solution for how to supply enough renewable energy that at least it's getting put into the grid somewhere to, indirectly benefit our customers. But back to the local energy goal, we really are striving to make as much of this come from local sources as possible. And so we're looking for projects. We've got a few under contract already. We've got one near Hydesville. That's a pretty small solar only project of 2 megawatts. That's a year or so out. And then we've got another project in the Arcata area, in the Arcata Bottoms, just outside of city limits. That's on part of the property of the former Sun Valley Floral Farms, and that's about 7 megawatts of solar paired with a couple of megawatts of storage. So that's also hopefully going to be online within the next few months. So we're excited that we're starting to build towards the local. We're trying to really, be careful about incorporating enough storage to match our energy generation, especially where we're getting that solar that's just generating in the middle of the day. Um, so to that end, we're issuing a solicitation, which we hope to have out before the end of next month, and we'll keep it open for a period of a few months, looking specifically for local Humboldt County energy storage projects. What first got us really thinking about that as an opportunity was the two biomass plants that are no longer operating, the one here in Blue Lake and the one in Fairhaven. We thought we had a path forward with the Fairhaven project. I mean, the attraction of both of those is one of the most difficult things about bringing any kind of new energy project online is the grid interconnection. California and PG&E service territory in particular are really challenged these days with connecting not only new generation but new loads as well. You've probably all heard a lot about all the challenges that came to light a couple of years ago with especially Southern Humboldt, not even being able to figure out how to bring their new hospital online. So both generation and load, the grid is just having trouble keeping up with growth on both sides. And so having a facility that is already in place and already has like the wires coming to it and has been connected to the grid before is a really big asset. And so that got us looking at the two idle biomass facilities as potentially some of the best places in Humboldt to develop energy storage projects. And we did actually do a solicitation, which got us an offer for a storage project at Fairhaven, and it was originally with a company called Broadreach Power, and they eventually transferred the project to a different company, Anji. Anji worked on the project for a couple of years, and they made two unfortunate discoveries. One was that the substation adjacent to the biomass plant, this is a dedicated substation that's built specifically for that power plant, So it dates back to, I guess, the 1980s. They just, once they finally really did their due diligence on that substation, they realized that it was going to take a lot of rebuilding. That was going to be a multi-million dollar project. The other thing that they discovered was that California Independent System Operator that makes the rules for connecting facilities to the grid has a rule that if a facility has been idle for more than 3 years, then it's no longer considered an active interconnection. And so if you want to connect a project again there, you have to actually go get in their interconnection queue, which is a years long process. So the combination of cost of rebuilding the substation and the long delay in being able to bring the project online ultimately convinced Anji that they didn't have a viable project. So they walked away from it. I've since had conversations with some other people who are in communication with Bob Figas, the current owner of Fairhaven, and they think that they might have a way forward on this. So they're excited about the fact that we're getting ready to put out this solicitation for new local energy storage. We would be very excited to also see some kind of proposal that we can entertain associated with the Blue Lake site. And we're aware of at least one other developer that just is partway through the process of planning and developing some just smaller scale energy storage projects kind of scattered around Humboldt County in a few strategic locations. So we think we'll get a pretty robust response to this solicitation. And this is for us kind of fulfillment of something that started with conversations with Mandy and getting into that. And one other thing I'll mention, tangentially related, is that early in my conversations with Mandy, she was bemoaning the problem with the chip pile. And since we have a contract with the Scotia Power Plant, Humboldt Sawmill Company, I immediately called them up and asked them about it. And they actually sent somebody over to look at it. And they poked around a little bit and said, this is not viable fuel for a biomass plant, which was really disappointing to hear, but it's compost, yeah. So tried to be helpful in that way, but to no avail.
Go worms.
So happy to answer any further questions.
I have a question just about the relationship between this request for proposals that you're putting out, and our potential agreement with this exclusive option to negotiate with one specific company, and how that, like, what if it's a different company that wins the proposal from our CEA? How does that interplay with?
Yeah, and I don't have a great handle on like what capacity you guys are looking for, but it seems like we're at a kind of a point where storage is the huge gap. So I think the company that we're working with, they understand this pretty well, and they kind of see this as a phase project. So phase one is a 12 megawatt installation, and then phase two is ramping up to 100 megawatts. So the first, and when you look at that, it sounds like a big jump, but it's really pretty small when you look at like the number of containers, because kind of looking at the footprint. So I'm not sure like what your full need is right now, but I think it's kind of scalable and it'll move up over the years. There's a lot that has to go into getting the KISO authorizations. And so they see this as kind of a long-term investment. The short term is get the plant done, get the 12 megawatts going, because that's a pretty easy kind of scalable project, and then work towards the 100 megawatts later. But I don't know, Richard, what your guys is, kind of what you're thinking about capacity wise.
Yeah, well, one thing to get at Commissioner Hogan's question is just that when we do these solicitations, one of the main things that we're looking for in evaluating any offers we get is site control. And since the property currently belongs to City of Blue Lake, if somebody came with an offer and they didn't already have some kind of agreement in place with City of Blue Lake or relationship, at least to point to, we couldn't entertain that as a serious offer.
I see.
Uh, yeah, and for them to get KISO interconnection, they have to be able to demonstrate site control too. So that's really one of the very, very first things that a developer needs to do is get into some kind of arrangement, a lease or an ownership or something. As far as how much our appetite is, Well, I will say we had that contract for what would have been 17 megawatts at Fairhaven. So replacing that is sort of a minimum threshold for us. We at least expect that. But we have a fairly large appetite for storage, in the tens of megawatts, but I don't have exactly, but, certainly more than 17. That's expecting one away.
What's the like? How does this stuff secure? Are you secure? Is there like, is a big fence around it? Is it like, what's that look like?
Sure. Yeah, there's fencing going up around the solar and storage project in Arcata Bottoms right now. I've been going by that site every few days and looking at the progress. And that's like the first thing they're doing before they even start putting any equipment on site is they're doing like a, I don't know, 6 or 7 foot chain link fence around the whole perimeter, topped with barbed wire, just the standard things that you would do to keep people out and limit your own liability.
Yeah, and that's kind of what they had laid out here for us to. And I don't know, did you guys get a copy? Yeah. They would do the fencing, and then they said they like to do planting around it too, whether it's just trees. It just kind of helps to buffer it because it's if you went down right now to the site and next door is B&B, they probably have just as many shipping containers or more than what would be proposed over on the site. So but they're narrow. So they're like, kind of narrow and long. So they take up a little less of a footprint. But yeah, they would fully screen it, the slatting and the fences, and they offered up several options for the city just to make it more palatable. So it looks more like a landscaping area than just like stay out, barbed wire fencing.
Yeah,
And
and typically, like the way storage is being built these days is they'll kind of take whatever the interconnection capacity is and build a storage system that's built big enough that it can discharge at full capacity for 4 hours. So if you look at like, did you say this is 12 megawatts? Yeah. So they would probably have like, 4 times that, so 48 megawatt hours of storage capacity. If you want a sense of scale locally, like if you go up by the airport and look at the solar microgrid project that we did with Shots and PG&E, that's 8.8 megawatt hours of storage. So 5 or 6 times that size, I think would be probably what you would end up with. So if you go and look at just like how many closures there are battery storage up there at the airport, and then picture multiplying that by 5 or 6, that would be my kind of wild guess at physically what the footprint might look like of a project when we get here, just using the existing machine capacity.
Is that 6 acres? Is it its own separate parcel, or would we need to be doing a lot split?
Yeah, we definitely have to be doing some lot line adjustments or split. It's a couple parcels, two or
At
three,
least two
three.
parcels
Yeah.
there. Great.
Yeah, it's kind of oddly configured, so we'd have to clean that up as well.
Okay. And then before the city's able to enter into this agreement, the Surplus Lands Act comes into play, right?
So we talked about that, and because it hasn't been rezoned, and it stayed within its existing use, and the use proposed is consistent with the zoning and what it had been, we didn't. Our attorney was able to make the determination that it didn't apply at the point.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, those are all my questions. We were gonna do public comment. Is there some commission? Okay. All right. Is there any public comment on? Yeah. Oh, yes. All hands up. Okay. All right. All right. Who wants to go first here in person in the room? Oh, you got to come to the microphone. That way everyone on Zoom can hear you too, and on TV.
I don't know where on this big many acres piece is the 6 acres that you're considering selling. Is it at the end where the gravel people are, or is it the end near hatchery?
Maybe we could, do we have
I
is
know,
this
but it's like
presentation up where we could screenshot just that for Zoom people too?
Okay. Where's oh, okay, so it's right in there. Okay. Okay, the other question I had is if the net regular grid goes out and this starts going for us, how long would it last? I mean, is it several hours? Like if our electricity goes out, that's what this is for, is it will add to our grid so that then we would have electricity.
So
So how
that's
long would
something
we
that
have?
Richard, maybe you can talk to, because that was something that we did ask Power Transitions about, is whether there is an option to build in some community resiliency. And it sounds like that's a pretty large undertaking to be able to kind of island Blue Lake. Um, and so I'm not really sure how something like that would work, if that could be a longer term objective. But I don't believe so. What we were told is that it has the capacity to power, I think he said 30,000 homes for 2 hours, 100 megawatts. But that's just sending it back into the grid. It's not being
Okay,
like, well,
not
you're a
just
Blue
for Blue
Laker
Lake.
and, type thing. So I think to be able to have that system be able to feed back specifically just to Blue Lake, you're talking about a whole different kind of
Oh,
grid
okay.
system. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And the other question is, how do you make money from it? I mean, will the consumer just simply pay the same amount? Either they're paying the regular electric company, or they're paying you, or the. So would it have an effect on the consumer? And then my last question is, let's see, what was it? Oh, that when you make a contract, can you make it enforceable this time that it would be cleaned up if the company, if it's outdated? I, that's directed to Mandy, really. The contract that would be made up,
Mhm.
would it be enforceable this time that if it was outdated and they weren't going to do it anymore?
Absolutely. So we would write a contract where they would also be bonded for the project. So there would be very tight controls
Okay, they
through
would
this process.
clean
Yeah.
it up.
Yeah. I don't know, Richard, if you want to talk at the mic or you want to, we don't have a portable, we need a portable mic.
No worries. Yeah, so the the how do consumers pay for it question, it just becomes another resource on the grid that people are paying for through their rates. So, we charge people for generation. People who are customers of our program are paying us for generation, and they're paying PG&E for the transmission and delivery of the electricity. So, as we're setting our rates today, we have a very simplistic formula, which is that we just take PG&E's rates and subtract 0.5% from them. And we've been doing that, PG&E minus X amount ever since we started our program. We've varied the value of X a little bit over time according to our financial condition, but it's currently just set at 0.5%. So for now, we just charge that, and the costs of all these contracts we have, we just use our revenues from that, the customer payments to pay for all those resources, whether it's storage or solar or wind or what have you. Um, we are considering moving to a cost of service model, like municipal utilities use, where we would actually be kind of building our rates from the bottom up rather than just simplistically relating them to PG&E's rates. So that's something we're working towards in the future. We're not there yet. When we get there, you might see a more direct relationship between, oh, it's costing this much for us to have this storage contract, and that's going to make our customer rates go higher or lower relative to what we'd be paying if we were getting that from a different, more or less expensive resource. But right now, it's much more simplistic. We're just setting our rates against PG&E's, and whatever money is left over after we pay our bills goes into our reserves or lets us think about lowering our customer rates.
Can you talk a little bit about PG&E rates, like peak demand rates? Are those higher than um, other times, or like are we seeing the benefit of having more renewables on the grid versus the fossil fuel costs? Because it seems to me, in my mind, this is the benefit I see is that the renewables are cheaper, uh, and then we're capturing the extra from them and being able to put that on. So we're kind of capturing the cheap energy and being able to put it back on the grid when normally it would be the higher price fossil fuel based type of or dirtier plants. That was one of the things that Jeff had talked about is that being able to capture and use more renewables prevents the usage from these plants that are also maybe higher emission plants or less efficient plants, and so kind of getting the dirtier plants offline at a greater rate by doing this. So I don't know if that makes sense or if that's a consumer benefit.
Yeah, there are a couple of publicly available sources you can look at online that have really detailed comparisons of the costs of renewables versus conventional power, like, coal or natural gas power. And it's been fascinating to watch that over the last few years because we really are seeing this kind of transition where it is getting less expensive to procure the renewables than the conventional energy, but you still have to address the fact that, like, a natural gas plant is dispatchable, which means you can turn it on or off depending on how much customer demand there is. And with solar and wind, it's not that easy. Hence the need for this storage so that you can match when the energy is available to when the load is happening. I mean, there are all kinds of other mechanisms for doing that. We have one contract for demand response. So we've got a company that's, sending out signals to people to, turn their Nest thermostats up or down, to help balance part of the grid load. So, we're getting a little bit of our resource needs met that way. But but yeah, battery storage combined with renewables, um, it's not necessarily cheaper than fossil fuels, but then there's that whole question of externalized costs, so, we're having a lot of public health burdens that come from burning fossil fuels and mining uranium for nuclear plants and dealing with the waste from all those kinds of plants. So, if you take into the account the externalized costs, which is, much more complicated analysis, but you may still see the clean energy sources coming out significantly ahead if you're really looking at the big picture that way. But if you want to look at this, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory or a company called Lazards publishes reports they put up online that show really nice, easy to interpret bar graphs showing how the costs of those different resources compare against each other. And storage is coming down in price a lot, and that's allowing a lot more deployment of it. This past year has been really dramatic in terms of how much new storage came online in California. I think we're up to 8 gigawatts of storage capacity now statewide, and that was enough that energy storage is considered the main factor that made this last summer kind of a cruise for the California grid.
Yeah.
We had a couple of summers before that when we, either had rotating outages or very, very close calls and avoided them by the skin of our teeth. And this year, even though we had some really intense heat waves, the grid just kind of cruised through it. And you look at the supply stack, you look at the graphs of hour by hour, what was online, and the batteries really saved the day. So that's,
I kind of wondered about that. I was like, why didn't we have any like brownouts or anything this last year? It was so hot.
yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
How long do batteries last?
They typically are considered to have about a 10-year lifespan, meaning that whatever capacity they were rated for when you put them in, that they can reliably stay at that capacity for 10 years. They do start to decline, and um, there's different strategies for dealing with that decline. One is to just keep adding more batteries on, so and a lot of companies do that. They're just like they put in, 50 batteries, and at the end of 10 years they add, like 12 more batteries to keep it up at the contract capacity they're responsible for. Or in other cases, they'll just take out the worst performing ones and replace them with brand new ones. Um, but yeah, typically like 10 years is kind of the expected lifespan for environment.
Did that answer your question, Marty? Kind of? Yes. Okay.
More public comment? Oh, Lisa was first. Go ahead, go ahead. Yeah. Your hand went up first. Yeah.
Just a quick, hi, Richard. Thank you. Yes, my name is Lisa Hoover, and just a clarification, because maybe like what Mandy said, I don't understand well, probably less than Mandy does, but the infrastructure needs for this storage, there's the interconnection, um, I don't understand how that gets and you talked about the existing facility there has something already in place, so you don't have to build something new. So are there any other infrastructural poles, wires, transfer, anything like that that need to happen in association with this project? Or is the existing one, because you said there was something where if it's 3 years old or 4 years old, they tell you, yeah, we're not gonna. So that was one question. And the other one had to do with the cleanup. I did not hear any mention made about they talked about the wood pallets and things like that, but what about any toxic related cleanup? Because we know that there's that in this area, and so I didn't hear any mention made, and I don't know if the cost that was put out includes not just cleanup of the biomass and material, but also but when you do hit the toxic or the hazardous waste there, that's a cleanup issue that I didn't hear get addressed. So thank you.
Do you want me to jump in on the, go ahead, you go first. Sure. So yeah, so the cleanup of the site, the company's analyzed it both from a kind of straight cleanup position and also from the environmental kind of position that we do have, we potentially could have asbestos on the site. Um, Luckily, honestly, the operation was pretty limited. The biomass, the ash was always contained. It was hauled off site. The chemical applications were pretty limited. It was regularly tested. And what we have right now on site is really just a lot of residual, just kind of leftover junk that's decaying on site. But there's not a lot, luckily, there's not a lot of um, toxic chemicals on site. So we had a good list of what they were using for, but it was a pretty clean operation from that standpoint, I would say, where there wasn't a lot of chemical application. The wood waste that was burned was pretty clean, refined wood waste. It wasn't, treated. Uh, Materials. It was, coming straight from the sawmills. There is some hog fuel on the site, mostly larger diameter branches and things that they were going to come in and use a hog fuel machine to kind of chip up, but that never happened. And a lot of that got hauled out. Actually, Bob Vegas came and got a lot of that. Um, but as far as, chemicals, we're pretty familiar with what's there, and it's not too big of an issue. But the cleanup will go through a full environmental process. They'll have to go through CEQA, and that's all something that's factored into the cost of demolition. So this company is very professional. There's no corner cutting. I mean, they're talking about, overall, this is, tens of millions of dollars in investment, over the lifespan of this project. So they're not proposing to, come in there behind the scenes and start pulling stuff out. Everything has to be permitted. There's air quality permits, there's demo permits through the city. They'll be required to be fully bonded to be able to do this. Their subcontractors will all be licensed, bonded contractors. So it's a very, frontal process that will have to go through all of the regulatory framework in order to do the project.
Thankful the tire burning plant never got approved. We'd have a much bigger mess on our hands. Right. Yeah, for the regarding the infrastructure questions, so there's kind of two layers. There's the physical infrastructure, and we did see with the Fairhaven plant just the vintage of material equipment there, which is kind of similar to the vintage of equipment here. That the answer they got when they started looking at that carefully is that they did have to replace a lot of equipment. Like I said earlier, they determined that was a multi-million-dollar cost that the developer couldn't bear. Um, it is, marine environment out there, so it might not be nearly as bad of a situation here, but I would guess still that a lot of the equipment is just really dated. And, there might be a lot of things that they're like, oh, well, this isn't really compatible with today's grid. So there may be discoveries of stuff that needs to be replaced in terms of equipment to physically reconnect. I, had a site walk out there a few months ago with me and a couple of my coworkers, and we saw like where the plant was formerly connected to the grid. The wires are just like somebody came out there with like wire cutters and just chopped them. So I don't know what actually has been removed there. There are still transformers and things out there, but I don't know if those are all grid ready by today's interconnection standards. Apart from that kind of physical infrastructure side, a separate thing is just the California Independent System Operator that governs interconnections in California and their rules. And I think what happens there is, the plant is idle and offline for 3 years. CAISO kind of looks at their watch and says, okay, we've got lots of other resources that we want to put on the grid, and this thing isn't doing anything. So they just start kind of filling the gaps of the grid need with other resources. So I think at some point they just say, look, we're fully booked with resources, and so if you want to put something new on the grid, you have to get in the queue. And like I said, that queue typically takes several years to get through. Like resources that are applying in the current round of grid applications this year are typically not going to be able to actually get online delivering power to the grid till around 2030 or 2032. So it's, like a 7, 8 year gap to be able to come online. That's, not so much about the physical infrastructure at this site. It's more just about how CAISO manages its whole queue of interconnection applications across the state. So
Yeah.
if there is a pathway that Power Transitions has identified to be able to somehow, jumpstart that old interconnection, that saves years in getting the project.
Yeah, and I think they've been looking at it, from multiple standpoints of whether they can fast track or if they have to get in the queue, and they're willing to do both. So, which is nice. So I think, looking at this is kind of a long-term investment, kind of what like the short and even short term is like what 3 years, the goal for us is to, really phase this project so demo happens right away while they're working on everything else, getting things ready. There might be some outreach, legislative outreach even to, kind of get these things freed up. Because it does seem like there's kind of a bottleneck with CAISO. But and maybe that'll free up at some point too, but they're willing to make that investment knowing there's kind of the short term, um, quick, but then there's got to be a long term objective as well that they're willing to make that investment into.
So they never public advice built or anything like that to transfer this at all. It's more about on site. Okay.
All right, next.
Kit man. And to answer the infrastructure question, because I asked that question because I have neighbors who are concerned about high tension power lines. And the lines that are coming in that have been serving the plant are the same lines that would serve this project. They don't need to build anything else as far as power lines in. They're 69 kilovolt lines. At any rate, I did ask that specific question. Um, because as Gary and some of you know, my house is the defined nearest residential house to the industrial park. I'm quite concerned about noise and that kind of thing. It's really important for you guys to understand the difference between lithium ion and lithium iron phosphate. And if you just go to the web and say compare lithium ion to lithium iron phosphate, which is what they're proposing, that's a really crucial difference. When you look at battery energy storage systems that catch on fire or have a lot of noise, they're almost always lithium ion because it has a much narrower thermal tolerance. So the air handling has to be very tight in order to keep it in that tolerance. And when you have a what do they call it? A thermal runaway, otherwise known as a lithium fire that lasts for 4 days. That doesn't happen with lithium ferrous, LFP. The F stands for ferrous. LFP. It doesn't happen with LFP batteries. They aren't flammable on the inside. They don't get hot. They've got a much wider thermal tolerance, so you don't have to have as much air handling, so you don't have all the fan noise, all that kind of stuff. So as you know, and this is all going to come to you at some point way down the, you know, but keep that in mind. Really, really different technologies.
Thank you.
All right. Is there any public comment on Zoom? Julie, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to get to my notes real quick. I really appreciated the comments of our prior speakers. We're all so diverse. I want to just note that Jeff, during his presentation to council, which I hope every commissioner was able to take the time to attend and review that recording, he mentioned a 3-year expiration of the plant that would have to be, you know, we lost that time to renovate it within that 3 years is what I understood. And I completely understand we're stuck with the cleanup and we got to have a partner or a buyout. Council during COVID with the push basically from the mayor and the manager is the one that decided not to renew the lease. The council then really had no knowledgeable comments, and because it was COVID, there really was no public during that decision making. Regardless, in the past 3 years, the city knew we would have to facilitate this cleanup and we would need partnership. And the timing of this proposal through that 3-year marker is very timely. I feel like we've lost out on our grants, our visions, our time. There are several local construction businesses, one of which is probably going to end up purchasing Pepe's yard. I would assume they'd be capable of the cleanup. It's just an example of creating jobs and sales tax, mainly off the lease. I just feel like our council was very wise and polite at the last meeting to bring this back to the new council. And I'm not sure with council's motion, kind of why we're taking up crucial time on an important planning commission meeting. I just hope this commission will take advice of our current council who already decided to table this. And we can hopefully, you know, get some other proposals on the table. Think about this a little broader. RCA, great, but you know, listen to the neighbor there. I mean, there's lots of options, and you know, Danco's lease is $1. The battery powered stuff is PG&E. It's not really renewable energy. And I'm taking up a lot of time rambling, but I do hope this goes quicker. We should break these meetings up into more special meetings, actually. It's just a little too much, you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Is there any other public comment? This is a discussion item only. No action to be taken. Any other public comment? All right. Seeing none, we will close this item. Thank you very much for coming. All right, and we will move on to what is labeled as number 5 and is now number 6 on our agenda. We have a public hearing and possible action regarding the adoption of a CEQA negative declaration and amendment to the general plan housing element for the 6th cycle planning period to comply with state housing law. So,
Cool.
turn it over to
I
Scott.
would like to get set up with the PowerPoint
Absolutely,
presentation, make
yes.
sure everything's
Yep,
clear.
let's take a moment here, no problem. I'm just
Okay. All right, like I'm all situated.
Great.
So I was going to do a little combination between kind of going through and paraphrasing through the staff report that I prepared, as well as going through a PowerPoint presentation. So in the staff report, I attempted to kind of document the process that's gone on, essentially. That, as you may know, state law requires us to update our housing element every 8 years. We're currently in the sixth cycle for housing element planning periods. This is 2019 to 2027. The city did receive funds from the state from both the LEAP and REAP grant programs and got those first funds in around 2021. So this has, to date been a 3-year process. I worked closely with the Planning Commission on this, had a number of meetings, public hearings, discussion items. We did 2 town hall meetings, and then we also did some interviews with community stakeholders, folks such as the Community Resource Center and stuff like that. So also, we've gotten a draft together, and it was in 2023 that was reviewed by HCD, and we'll talk about who they are a little bit in my presentation, but they essentially directed the city to move forward with the adoption process. And that was the point at which we prepared a CEQA document, a CEQA initial study, and resulted in staff recommending a negative declaration, which I'll also talk about a little bit as well. So basically, HCD's reviewed the element update. They told us to move forward with adoption. We've prepared a CEQA document. We've circulated it. We've responded to comments, as you may have seen if you reviewed the revised draft. So we're at that point where it's time for the Planning Commission to consider making a recommendation to the City Council on adoption of the element update as well as the CEQA negative declaration that's being recommended. So once the Planning Commission makes a recommendation, then it goes on to the City Council and they receive and consider that recommendation. And as we know at the staff report, the soonest that potentially could happen would be at the December 10th meeting. That obviously depends on when the Planning Commission acts on their recommendation. So there was a number of comments that were received at the last meeting that kind of showed that I should probably give a little more background on this process and what we've done and what it's all about. Plus, we have some new commissioners that haven't necessarily been involved in that process over the last 3 years. So I thought this would be beneficial to folks to go through some of this. This presentation is adapted from one I've given twice, once at a town hall meeting, once at a public hearing, but it's been a bit updated to what's gone on more recently. And we've got the new cool logo the city has. So, all right, I'll go ahead and go through presentation. So starting with HCD, or California Department of Housing and Community Development, for those who don't know, this is the primary agency that implements state housing law and also enforces state housing law. And they do have a housing accountability unit that enforces violation of state housing law if a jurisdiction makes improper decision or if they're unwilling to adopt a housing element update or just generally comply with state housing law. So that is one of their jobs as an agency. And as I noted, they review our element update. That's their job, to review it and make sure it's consistent with the state housing law. So then locally, we also have the Humboldt County Association of Governments, joint powers agency composed of the 7 incorporated cities, as well as the County of Humboldt. Their job is to help develop the regional housing needs allocation. So they help to determine what is the regional housing need, how many units should be allocated to Humboldt County as a whole, and then distributed to the various jurisdictions. So that's how Blue Lake gets its RENA allocation, is with HCOG, who also works with the local jurisdictions and HCD in that process. So before moving into talking about the current cycle, I'd like to give some background on what's gone on historically with housing element updates for Blue Lake. So that was our 2015 one. You can see the cover right there. That was the one that was not adopted or certified. But prior to that, starting in 1986, was the first time the city adopted a housing element update. That was at a time that the city did a larger general planning effort. The last time the city did a larger general planning effort. So then actually the city got certification in 1992. That was my boss, former boss, Bob Brown, did that back in 92. My first attempt at it was in 2004 and it was adopted and certified. That's the last time it happened. I did move away for a few years. I wasn't here in 2005, but anyway. So in 2009, the city adopted it, but there was things they weren't willing to do that were necessary under state housing law. That's why it didn't get certified. One of those was the state wanted the city to pick a zone, such as the planned development residential zone you have here on the west side of the city, and allow apartments or multifamily housing by right. We had a requirement in there that you had to get a conditional use permit, and the state said that's too much uncertainty. Developers aren't going to want to develop multifamily housing in your community because you're requiring discretionary review, and nobody knows how that's going to go. So it's too much of a risk. And the state feels that way in general. They apply that concept all over the state. That's why they're very serious about by right zoning for multifamily housing. So in 2015, we were able to do an update with funds from the Strategic Growth Council. It was a grant that we got from them. But at the time, the city basically said, we don't have money to do this. The grant was nice. We did a draft. We're not going to move forward with it. We did provide it to HCD. We did get a comment letter back, and that was part of what we used to help us in the sixth cycle. And one thing that's important to note, this question was asked a lot over the years. Like when I worked on the 2015 one, and over the last 3 years, there's been several commissioners and members of the public who don't necessarily like all the things the state's asking cities like Blue Lake to do, especially rural cities. And so it's always, what are the consequences of non-compliance with state housing law? What if we just don't do a housing element, and we don't agree to some of these things they want us to do? So first off, the city could be sued. HCD and the Attorney General have brought lawsuits against communities for improperly denying projects as well as not achieving compliance with their housing elements. But it's not just the state. There's pro-housing groups as well. We've been contacted by YIMBY, Law, and other groups asking us, let's see your housing elements. They want to look through the code to see if we're compliant on certain state housing law, things like that. They've never challenged the city yet, but we've gotten Public Records Act requests where they were doing their investigation to see what we were complying with and what we weren't. They have sued other jurisdictions. Also, the city could be denied grant funding. So communities like Blue Lake rely very heavily on grant funding to do a lot of things. We wouldn't have worked on this housing element update or its CEQA document without two separate grant funding sources. Blue Lake doesn't have the resources to comply with these things. And the grant funding can also be used by development projects for infrastructure in the community, all sorts of stuff. So it is important for a community like this to be able to meet that threshold requirement of having a certified housing element in order to get grant funding. And then lastly, I think some folks are already aware of this, but the state could take away local control. So if the city was unwilling to do this, the state's like, fine, you have a non-compliant housing element. People can do multifamily housing in some of your zones. So they could just allow those projects to happen. We've also seen this with ADUs. There's really no planning review at all anymore for ADUs. So you have laws like the Housing Accountability Act and others that are very strongly protect housing production, affordable housing projects, things like that. So those are kind of the three main consequences if the city wasn't to adopt and get its housing elements certified. So then why don't we go into talking about our sixth cycle housing element updates. So that's the cool snazzy cover that we created for it. Obviously that mural in town. As far as what we're planning for in there, this is the cover of this current cycle's RENA plan that was developed by HCOG in consultation with HCD and all the local jurisdictions. And in there, this was the allocation for the sixth cycle for the city of Blue Lake. It's highlighted there. So 23 units, you can see how it's broken down by income level. Because Blue Lake didn't have a fifth cycle certified element, the state now has punitive rules that essentially say if you didn't plan for the last cycle's RENA, you have to add the two together, the sixth cycle and the fifth cycle, and you plan for it in your sixth cycle element. So you'll see our number is actually 34 when you add the two together. And these are the income categories it's broken down by 23 in this cycle, 11 in the last one. The 11's so low because we were coming off the recession. So they lowered RENA allocations across the state because of that. It is believed that in the seventh cycle, the number will be higher than 23 because the state has found that actually the housing need is greater than they have previously estimated. But anyway, The number that we technically have to plan for in this housing element update is 34, and it's in these income categories, and that really matters because you do have to identify sites that can be developed with housing in each one of those income categories. So I'd like to talk a little bit about available housing sites in the city. The aerial photograph you see on the left, that's what we had as our available sites that could accommodate most of the residential development potential in the last several housing element planning cycles, the fourth and the fifth. These were the sites we were pointing to. They're on the west side of the city, right off South Railroad Avenue here. Yeah, they're big open expanses. They do have inadequate infrastructure. South Railroad isn't the greatest road to serve lots that large. There's environmental constraints. You can see large wetlands on these. There's drainages through these. So the combination of inadequate infrastructure and environmental constraints, when we were including these sites in our housing elements, the state consistently said each time we got a review letter, like, these aren't great sites. Like, can you explain to us why you believe these are going to be developed? And nowadays, they want to see vacant sites. You can tell here some of these are underutilized sites. The threshold for explaining why an underutilized site should be counted towards your arena is much higher than it used to be. So really, we realized going into the sixth cycle that one, these sites don't have the development potential that we previously thought they did, and two, you have to put a lot more effort into justifying that these underutilized sites would be developed. And to explain that a little more, I mean, they would look at it and say, this is clearly an agricultural use of some sort. Why would it be plausible that somebody would want to sell these or develop them themselves? Can you please explain that to us? You've claimed them for 2 or 3 cycles now and nothing's happened. We're not really buying that these are adequate sites anymore. So that is one of the reasons and one of the things that led to doing mixed use zoning in the Powers Creek district. We needed to find better sites that we could point to and say, yes, this is where we're going to meet our RENA allocation. And they needed to be larger sites because those are considered by the state to be sites that can accommodate affordable units or units that are lower. So these are kind of well, especially these here, is several acres that could be developed under the opportunity zone at 1 unit per 2,500 square feet. And so that's where we really see our multifamily potential going. So this is the vacant sites inventory map. I just previously focused a little bit on the opportunity zone, the Powers Creek district, but this is really all the sites we're identifying as vacant where our RENA allocation can be met in those various income levels. So here again, that's the opportunity zone, the Powers Creek district. You got a couple MU mixed use zone parcels here. You've got some PDR over here. And then you've got a few vacant single family zone sites sprinkled throughout kind of those residential neighborhoods in the city. So when you look at deciding like, okay, what do we say as far as what income levels could occur? This is where we were saying lower if you look at the housing element. This is where we were saying some moderate, pretty much most of the remaining vacant single family lots were counted towards above moderate, which is consistent with what we've seen. If there's a city lot that's vacant in town, it usually gets built with a pretty nice house. And that's what we've seen over, looking at building permit records, reviewing projects. So that's kind of how we went about it. They also want you to look at like, which ones are likely developable versus questionably versus likely not. And we looked at all the vacant sites. And there's a few in there. Yeah, they're a lot. They're vacant. But, the topography on some of these, it would be like a wetland. I mean, so we marked those as that's probably not gonna happen. The likely developable, they have good infrastructure, they have good access, they don't have too many environmental constraints. That's what you see as likely developable. And I think there's only one that's questionably developable, and it's just because of its size. So this is a draft of our zoning map, which is something we've talked about putting out for a while now. We finally do have a draft. We still have to review it as staff. There are a couple funky little things in there, but this does show the current zoning in the city, including what was done for the Powers Creek district. So you do see the O zone here, which previously was industrial, light industrial. So we will be getting this together with the kind of modernization of the general plan that we're going to work on. But this is what we have today.
And yeah, as I was noting before, a few of the maybe moderate income sites are over here in PDR. You can see that one in particular that's vacant. And then, our biggest sites for lower here in the opportunity zone. We have one here in mixed use and one here that's we're saying either moderate or above moderate. And then, as I noted, the rest of them are kind of standard single family lots in the R1 zone that we looked at as being above moderate. So that's kind of how we looked at where can our RENA allocation go within the city. Right? So this here is an analysis you have to do in your housing element, where you say basically, here's our RENA allocation from the fifth and sixth cycle. Here's our accessory dwelling unit capacity. So we're making a projection, an estimate of how many could happen in the city. We only did 4. And then here's the site capacity. So all those vacant sites I showed that we're saying have residential development potential, this is pretty much the opportunity zone right there. We're saying there's a potential for 56 units down there. And then the moderate is kind of sprinkled between the PDR and the MU, maybe a single family. The above moderate are all basically the R1 single family residential zoning. So when you look at that, sure, Arena is 34, but the actual estimated development potential or site capacity is 89. And when you look at some of the tables in there, we considered environmental constraints, setbacks, development standards, and access, things like that, that would limit the potential to develop on these sites. So no site really, unless it was a single family site that could have 1 unit, was counted at 100% of or maximum density, I should say. So a lot of these, especially in the Powers Creek district, there's a far more acreage there that if you multiplied it out and said, here's the max density on this acreage, the number would have been way higher. But, we were trying to take into consideration development standards and other constraints. And typically HCD doesn't buy that calculation unless it's yes, the 1 unit on a single family lot. Anything beyond that, they want you having it only be a percentage of the actual density that could be allowed. So when you compare it to, you're comparing basically um, what our allocation is with, site capacity, you're identifying a surplus. So, we're only asked to plan for so many units in the lower income. We have this site capacity, that's our surplus. Moderate, same thing. Above moderate, same thing. So it shows that in future housing element planning cycles, we'll be able to potentially count some of these sites as well. Right now, we only really need to plan for the 34, and then we threw in, okay, maybe 4 ADUs will happen too, kind of thing. So that shows you that kind of analysis and calculation you do where it's RENA versus the actual residential site capacity. So in addition to identifying adequate sites with appropriate zoning and development standards where your RENA can happen, there's also implementation programs that the city is committed to in its housing update. And this is just kind of an overview of what those are. If you look at it, there's a bunch of other implementation programs that aren't proposing any changes to regulations, zoning code, that kind of thing. But these are the most important because that's really what we're analyzing in the CEQA document is any changes to the zoning code. So ensuring consistency with state housing law, I point out which programs, if you look in there, this one is a big catch-all for a bunch of inconsistencies in our code with state housing law. Like ADU law, our code is very outdated. The definition of family, how we treat transitional supportive housing, it goes on if you look at program HI1. So yes, those are revisions to the city zoning code, but that's the law already. Basically, we're implementing state law and essentially ignoring our own outdated rules at this point. So this is really just cleanup to ensure consistency with state housing law. This one here, program HI14, that's been the sticking point for decades with the state. Why we didn't have certified elements in 2009 and 2015. The city was unwilling to pick a zone and say, fine, PDR zone, apartments or multifamily by right. And we're still feel that way. So that's why we're creating the multifamily combining zone. I'll explain that a little later. I have a few slides which show what that technically means. But essentially, it prevents us from having to allow by right in a whole zone, which applies to multiple properties throughout the city. And we're able to apply a combining zone to a specific property and allow the by right. So it's a more targeted approach, if you will.
Then we also have removing potential constraints to the development of multifamily housing. If you look at program HI 19, basically it says, okay, we're going to make this change to the PDR zone, the MU zone. In essence, what it is we had special development standards for multifamily housing in certain zones that the state called out and said, why is this different than R3 or your other zones allow multifamily? You're trying to prohibit multifamily in this zone or make it difficult. So in numerous cases, they called it out and said, explain to us why this isn't a barrier. But we couldn't, it was. So we're looking at small, changes to the code to provide consistency among our residential zones and how multifamily housing is treated. Mostly we're talking about development standards, things like height and setbacks, stuff like that. Then the next is to comply with the requirements for objective design standards. There's a particular government code section that relates to that. I think I talked about this last time in relation to our site plan approval process. That's our equivalent of design review. And there's some principles to be followed in there that say things like, is it consistent with the character of the community or compatible with the neighborhood? That's subjective. If somebody had to bring a permit application before the planning commission, you guys would be sitting there deciding whether you think it's compatible. That provides discretion that the state doesn't allow anymore. They want the standards, the design standards, to be objective. It's like, okay, it's a setback of 15 feet. That's it. Everybody understands it, knows it, can implement it, and there's certainty for developers. So really, we're going to have to take those principles to be followed in our site plan approval process and turn it into something more objective so there isn't discretion by the commission, staff, anybody really. So they've also told us that site plan approval process, those principles have followed are advisory and we can't enforce them because they're out of compliance right now. We need to make this change. So then lastly, there's also confusion in our code about our design guidelines. We've developed them for the downtown, for the mixed use zone. We've always known they're advisory, but it's hard to tell because the code refers to them. It makes it sound like they're law. So the state said, are you saying these are required? It's like, no, we'll fix that. So we need to basically state it so that it's clear they're encouraged, not required. So those are some of the important implementation programs that really form the project description that gets analyzed in the sequencing. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about this multifamily combining zone. There was a number of comments and questions about it, and I'm not sure folks fully grasped what it was or what the purpose was. So again, we're still trying to meet this by right requirement that we've been wrestling with the state on for 20 years. So to use as an example, this is the Calgon Carbon site. It's in the opportunity zone. So this concept of the multifamily combining zone, we'd be creating a new zoning tool. We already have combining zones. We have the plan development combining zone. We have a density combining zone. We have historic overlay zone. This would be a new one called the multifamily combining zone for the specific purpose of allowing multifamily housing by right at a particular density prescribed by the state. They believe in rural areas like this, if you allow 16 units per acre by right, that makes it easier to do affordable housing. In urban areas, the number's 25. So here it's 16. They dictated that this combining zone, if created and applied to individual properties, has to be applied to ones that are 1 acre or larger to meet the state's requirements. They provided a specific code sections that made that clear. So the idea is we create this and then we apply it to individual properties. This is about a 2 acre property. So if our next RENA allocation, the 7th cycle is 32 units or something like that, you could simply apply this and say, okay, we've definitely met our requirement for the lower income sites, essentially. Right now, though, really we only have to do it for the carryover for the 5th cycle. So we need to make that carryover, that 11 units by right somewhere. We anticipate it would happen in the opportunity zone, the Powers Creek district. That's really the best location for it, where we have sites large enough. And we're pointing out, that ultimately it could be applied to individual properties in our R3, which is our high density residential zone, in the mixed use, which is around the downtown, in the planned development residential, which is here on the west side of the city, and the opportunity zone, which is in the Powers Creek district. Those are options for the future once the tool's created. But in this cycle, they're asking us to do it before that we certify or they certify the element. So they want us to implement that program HI 14. Once we do so, we send them the ordinance or resolution, and then they would be willing to certify. Um, so yeah, that's an explanation of that. Um, and just to kind of, reiterate, maybe this property. I mean, these are candidates, the one just north of Paradise K, Calgon Carbon. Those are ones we've looked at. The one north of Paradise K, potentially more plausible because it doesn't have old carbon reprocessing plant on it. And most likely they're going to say, well, if you want to apply it to that old industrial site, I mean, when's that thing going to be demoed? When's this site going to be shovel ready? So this one would potentially make more sense. And we don't even necessarily have to apply it to the whole thing, only the portion that would get us to that 11 units. So there's still some details to work out there with the state, how exactly that gets implemented, but they have made it clear that before certification, that program needs to be done. And I'm going to go into CEQA, but I would note that that program will be subject to CEQA. We're not trying to cover that being adopted under the CEQA being done for the housing element. So last time there was questions from the commission about plan level versus project level CEQA analysis. So I wanted to provide a little more information on that. So as far as plan level, like a housing element update, that's analyzing the potential environmental impacts of the implementation of those goals, policies, and programs in the plan area, which in this case is citywide. And I read through some of those implementation programs that were relevant, where there was going to be, revised zoning code or amended zoning code. That's mostly what it's analyzing. It's not analyzing that we're going to have brochures about, fair housing laws at City Hall. I mean, none of that stuff has a potential for physical changes to the environment, was what you're analyzing, under CEQA. Now, project level, that's analyzing site-specific environmental impacts of a project. What the site is, what the study area is, what improvements they're proposing. You have technical studies done to determine those impacts, all that kind of stuff. It may require mitigation, that kind of stuff. So that's a general difference between plan level and project level, and I'll dial down on that a little more. So for plan level, again, housing element update, it's an analysis of those implementation programs, HI1 through HI23. Many of those have literally, it's like a paper exercise. It's no potential for impact on the environment. Some of them will amend the zoning code, but those amendments to the zoning code will have to go through CEQA. The housing element updates doesn't make that happen. It just says you should do it. Once you go to do it, then you have to analyze the impact. And then also, I think last time I pointed out that negative declarations, as opposed to mitigated negative declarations or EIRs, are often the CEQA determination when you're doing these individual general plan element updates, like a housing element update. And if you look to see what our local jurisdictions did, just for context, most of them adopted a negative declaration for their housing element updates. Those that had new EIRs for their general plans did addendums, which basically said, we already thought of this, there's no potential for further impact. So, and I think this statement here is really important. This is from the CEQA negative declaration that's been prepared for the housing element update, and it's at the beginning of every resource category, aesthetics through wildfire. And it starts out by saying the housing element update is a policy document that does not resolve physical changes to the environment, but encourages the provision of housing in areas of the city that are already designated and zoned to allow residential development. While policies could require amendments to the zoning code or result in actions of the city that could cause a physical change, the policies would not result in specific physical changes to the environment. Additionally, any amendments to the zoning code would be subject to project-specific environmental review pursuant to CEQA. So, yeah, this CEQA analysis that's done for the housing update is not meant to really analyze exactly what's going to happen because we don't have that specificity. The multifamily combining zone, we don't know exactly what properties can be applied to, and that has to go through the public review process with decision makers like the planning commission and the city council. And this is this map again. I'm just showing you, all the sites that we were looking at. So to contrast the project level sequences, this right here is the current site plan for the Danko project. This is what they submitted when they brought the new architect on. This is what we've sent out to all the agencies and tribes, and it's been reviewed by staff. This is what we're going to be analyzing in their secret document. And what we're looking at is an analysis of the site-specific physical impacts of this project. We know where the site is, we know what improvements are proposed, what utilities, access. You often do technical studies when doing the project level SQL analysis. Danko, for example, biological resources assessment, culture resources assessment, traffic studies, soil groundwater management plan, and several others, air quality modeling, all that kind of stuff. And those studies often recommend mitigation measures. There's mitigation measures for pre-construction surveys for certain special statuses. There's recommendations for monitoring for cultural and historic resources during initial ground disturbance, things like that. And ultimately, what you end up with, instead of the negative declaration that we're proposing for the housing element update, that policy document, you end up with a mitigated negative declaration. That's a common CEQA determination for projects that are not exempt. And there's definitely many projects in the city have been found to be exempt from CEQA in the past. The Danko project is not one of them that meets those thresholds. So that's my last slide. I'm going to leave it on that because I'm very excited that we have that. So, yeah, that's staff's presentation on this item. Hopefully some of that background was helpful to the public. Um, I would like to address a few comments that we received from Lisa Hooper, who's in attendance tonight. She was kind enough to provide these in advance. I didn't have time to respond to her, and I said I'd do so at the meeting. So her first question in regards to this, and several of these are related to CEQA and the environment, is how can the determination of less than significant for all environmental factors, and she refers to the housing element in certain pages, apply when both the housing element and the biological resources assessment of 2023 address environmental concerns that need to be addressed. So in other words, she's saying, how can you determine less than significant when the CEQA document and that biological resource assessment point out the potential for impacts or significant impacts? And I think I explained this in the last meeting. In the CEQA negative declaration, it was really for disclosure purposes. It was to document baseline conditions. I didn't need to put it in there. We could have just reiterated that language that I'd read through before, but I did so for better disclosure to the public. Like, here's these vacant sites that we're identifying is where our arena is going to go. What are the baseline conditions there? What are potential constraints? And it is true that some of these, say in the PDR zone, you got drainages and wetlands on these guys, so that'll have to be looked at. And there is a potential for an impact that would be addressed through project level environmental review. The biological resource assessment that is referenced in the question is the one that was completed for the Danko project, and just another example of the type of technical studies you do on the project level review. So the second question is, given that there is a need to address environmental impacts and mitigations, why did neither the biological resources table or the mandatory findings of significance table apply the less than significant with mitigation incorporated determination? So in essence, she's asking about in the biological resource section and the impact determination table, and in the mandatory findings of significance section, the impact determination table. And it's for the reasons I described before. None of these programs and the element itself has potential for physical changes to the environment. It's once those programs get implemented where you need to look if that potential exists, like the multifamily combining zone implementation. So question 3 is related to the circulation element. And I do believe this is something that was brought up by, I think, Gene Lynch at a past meeting, asking the circulation element, while outdated, states under the truck/industrial policy 23, as long as the city uses the existing truck route, the city should consider minimizing potential densities for residential lots within one local street or one block of Greenwood Avenue. And then the question really is, why wasn't this policy applied to the lots that are currently slated for a multifamily development proximal to Greenwood Avenue, West Side? Will this policy apply to other vacant sites proximal to Greenwood Avenue? What I would say is it's not entirely clear what they were saying as far as what to reduce densities to. It's noted that most of the lots along Greenwood are single family zoning, which is one of the less dense zones in the city. You do have the plan developed residential zone, but it basically allows 1 unit per 6,000 square feet, just like those single family lots. We have had one project approved on a larger lot. It was the Eliasa project, 3 acre lot. Some of you are familiar. That ended up with 10 units. So single family residential zoning allows 7 units per acre. 10 units on a 3 acre site is significantly less dense. So really in practice, when that project was approved, it ended up consistent with what they were saying here, although it's not entirely clear what exactly they were recommending. It's not like they said, well, instead of 6,000 per unit, 10,000 more appropriate or 20,000. It just said, consider minimizing potential densities for residential lots. You could go less dense than single family, but then half of those lots would be non-conforming because they're like 5,000 to 6,000 square feet in size. So anyway, that's just a little background on that. Not that it's necessarily directly related to what we're doing with the housing element update, but so the last question, question 4. While the city must plan for RENA's 5th and 6th cycle, which equates to 34 units, why does the housing element update include 89 new units, 55 more than is needed to meet the 5th and 6th cycle? Well, because this is a planning exercise. Not only are we looking at where we can provide the RENA, we're looking at the maximum development potential in general and saying, do we have a surplus over what's needed for the RENA, what we're supposed to plan for? And yes, we do. And so if one of the sites doesn't get developed at the density we recommended, then we potentially can pivot to one of the others or something like that. Or the next cycle, we've already identified sites that could meet our next rate. I will point out that I didn't just stop at looking at the max development potential in those vacant sites. I also looked at all the underdeveloped sites. We didn't use it towards our RENA. We didn't count it as a surplus. But if we're going to go through this, we should know maximum development potential throughout the entire city on both vacant and underutilized lots. So if you read the element, you'll see that in there, that we also looked at underutilized lots. But yeah, it's common practice. You don't typically say, okay, we can meet our 34 here, done. There's no surplus. It's usually you try and look at what the full development potential is when doing these updates. So anyway, that's a response to those questions. And that concludes the staff report. Thank you for listening. You guys do have to continue to go past 9 and take action. I assume we'll get there. But anyway, that's the presentation. Encourage you to open this public hearing and receive public testimony.
Great. Thank you so much, Gary. Very thorough presentation as always. Lots of information. Thank you very much. Yeah. Um, can we see our Zoom screen for any public comment there? And then I'll call for public comment here in the room as well. Opening up the public hearing for anything from the public. Anybody here in person that wants to provide public testimony? Yeah, sure. We'll go here first in person. Go ahead.
Gary, appreciate the distinction, and I know you asked this last time, the project versus the plan level, just because some of the things that were brought up didn't seem like there was no significant, but this is at a planning stage. But one question I do have is, especially down the Powers Creek area, what about cumulative effects? Because if you're dealing with things that are project by project thing, and let's say you have this project comes in this year, and then years down that, what about cumulative effects of developments in some of these areas? Because that is a part of the CEQA. I mean, I know it's part of NEPA, but it could be a part of the CEQA as well. So project by project mitigations we applied there, but what about at a planning level is almost where you need to think about the cumulative effects of some scales of development on certain parcels next door to other parcels or across a general area. Thank you very much.
We'll switch over to Zoom. There's nobody else here in person for public comment. So Julie, go ahead. You're up.
Okay, guys, sorry, I'm jumping doing barn chores. I appreciate Zoom very much. I do have to go back to the circulation of the housing element. It's really not been a good sit down review. And when I review Arcata and Eureka's planning commissions, like they'll actually have the document on the PowerPoint with the revisions highlighted, going page by page. They have several special meetings. during the circulation time where public comes in, they do it section by section, and they bring the amendments back, and they go over it again. And I think that, really you guys as commissioners, you would benefit from that. Us as public. I've dug through that sucker for years now, but we've got lots of changes within it. There are changes. Back in COVID, when we're able as Zoom members to be able to see these presentations and PowerPoints, I brought it up to council and the planning commission before. All they have to do is screen share it. Mandy does it in her videos with other people all the time. That, it's very simple, and I think we need to start doing that. I'm getting kind of annoyed that I have to keep asking, but the state guidelines, I really think, should be the core of our housing element. There is a lot of excess buried in it, and that's why I think there is some review, like the sewer and wastewater, for example. I just want to see if I'm correct. Like, a negative declaration is a written statement that an EIR is not required because the project will not have a significant adverse impact on the environment. And us adopting that tonight, I'm sorry, I was doing chores and I was trying to listen really hard, but like, is that going to umbrella? How much is that negative declaration, going to umbrella projects that happen within the city? Is it still going to be case by case, or are they now all got a negative declaration where they do not have to have an EIR? Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. I don't see any other public comment for now, so we'll come back up to mission for any questions or discussion.
I don't know that I have any left. That was wonderful. I guess this is a question directly like wastewater treatment. It's good. Fine. Well, that's a separate issue. All of this, is that, is that, I'm just,
How- Yeah, no, that's a great question because it is discussed in the housing element update as a potential constraint to well housing in the city. So yeah, with all the projects that have been approved or in the queue or potentially going to happen, it has been determined by the city engineer that at some point we will need to do upgrades to the wastewater treatment. And it's identified in the element what those are expected to be. They're looking at some electrical panel upgrades and more aeration. Now, obviously, you can only do so much aeration with a wastewater treatment plant to where you need to go more mechanical or that kind of thing. But it's been estimated that with those proposed improvements that they would get 180 residential equivalent units additional to the existing capacity, which would be enough for all the projects that have been approved during the queue, our projected ADUs, the Danko project, all of that. These projects would need to pay development impact fees towards their fair share towards those improvements. That would be an additional approval for Danko. To go back a little bit, the city knows that they want to do these improvements or have for years now. They first came about when Bad River Brewery wanted to like really increase production. And that was going to put some heavy loads on the system. So the city at that time said, whoa, okay, in order to accommodate this, we need to do upgrades. And that's the point at which they determined what those needed to be. So there's a memo from the city engineers saying this is what they need to be. Here's the engineer's opinion of cost. Obviously, those costs have gone up over time and have to be revisited. It will cost each project a little bit more, that kind of thing. But that has been planned back to when they wanted to increase production of brewery. Now, that never happened. Because it never happened, the city didn't do the upgrades. Well, now we've gotten to a point where, we've done this rezoning the Power Street district. We have several projects that may come online in the next 5 to 10 years, how long these will take. But at some point, we will reach that capacity and those upgrades will be needed. So the state read that discussion in the housing element. They said, okay, well, we would like to see you guarantee doing those improvements within this planning period. Okay, well, that timeline is similar to what's going to need to happen for some of these projects that are online. So you'll see one of the programs in there that says the city will do these planned improvements within 2 years of adoption of the element or something. Not that the city wasn't already planning to do it, but the state wanted some kind of guarantee. So that's basically where we're at with that. Mandy potentially could talk a little bit just about you wanted funding and things like that related to doing this, but it may be a situation where the city needs to pay to do it, and then each project that comes online needs to pay their fair share. And essentially, that fair share would be figured out by determining the residential equivalent units, um, and then essentially multiplying the cost per unit by their REU. And the cost per unit would be what's the total cost divided by those 180 REUs of additional capacity. That's a basic common calculation that's done for determining this kind of development.
I do have one other question though. Good question. Powers Creek property is the only one that's so those those are also. Can we bring that back? I think this. All the so one.
Um, that's when it was adopted and applied by the city council. So what it was applied to was here, here. So this was previously light industrial, this was light industrial, this was heavy industrial. So basically change it from heavy industrial and light industrial to the opportunity zone. Um, as far as, say the power plant site, it's not entirely known. I mean, maybe it'll be zoned opportunities sometime. Maybe it stays in industrial if that battery storage project happens. I'm not really sure. The power plant folks still had a lease in 2021. And so to not like try and plan over their ability to do something there and make them non-conforming, we left that side. Same thing with this site here. It's a gravel yard. There's industrial activity. It didn't make sense to try and rezone that. The rest of these sites, though, it really did. Some of them are vacant and would have greater and more beneficial development potential. And that was all part of getting away from heavy industrial developments, which was something the community has talked about for many years.
And so then some of the other sites that stuff.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I know that's a concern that people have shared. The majority of your residential population is really in these R1 neighborhoods here. You have some multifamily here that have mostly been developed with like fourplexes, triplexes, duplexes, that kind of thing. You definitely have some units within the downtown, but most of your residential developments here, there's not a lot of development potential in Blue Lake. There's not that many sites. Your greatest potential really is down here in the Powers Creek district. There's a couple little sites around the downtown. There's a few single family lots that are vacant. But yeah, I mean, this is the main one, and it's why, we focused on that in the housing element update.
I don't either. I've considered all the information and we're ready to make a motion.
Before the
Oh
motion,
yeah,
I
we
just
have
want
to
to clarify
close our,
one
yeah.
thing. One of the speakers mentioned you guys adopting the secret document. I
Oh,
want
right.
to clarify that your action tonight is just a recommendation to
Right.
the city council. It's ultimately up to the city council to adopt the housing element and adopt that secret document. And you'll see that in the resolution that is attached to the staff report. This is a recommendation mission in that resolution to 2020.
And just so I'm clear, it can't go to the city council without us.
That is a legal question. Um, if you were to fail to act, it's possible they could just take it up and say, fine, we're gonna, review it, but that's not the typical process. Yeah.
To recommended city council regarding adoption of secret negative declaration and amendment to the general plan housing element in 2019 and 2027 housing development plan period.
All right, we have a motion and a second to adopt the resolution. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, motion passes unanimously. Great.
Very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Gary. You're better.
Yeah, we'll most likely get that same presentation in the city council because we'll have some influence.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Company that are close that are now engaged. It's
Sure.
very
Good.
was.
And I do want to acknowledge that we're past 9 o'clock, and so we're supposed to extend the meeting period. And now I think we can probably finish in the next like 5 minutes or so. So is everybody okay with extending the meeting just a little bit? Okay, great. Moving on to miscellaneous planner items. What else do you guys have going on since you haven't been busy enough with all of this? Anything? Any updates?
I don't think I have anything. If you guys have seen the progression of the bike park, that's really exciting. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's uh and then Greenwood.
Mhm.
Greenwood's kind of getting towards the end.
Mhm.
We were doing landscaping today. They will be regrinding the speed tables because they're kind of more like speed humps right now versus speed tables. So they need to bring those into compliance with the engineered drawings. And then when the striping comes in, those speed tables will be striped with the blue and gold for Blue Lake Elementary School, which will be kind of fun. And then we'll get the striping down the crosswalks here and some flashing crosswalk signs and things and kind of wrap that project up. It seems like it's been going on forever. I don't know what we're going to do without it. I feel like the construction guys are like part of the family now, so it'll be kind of weird. But other than that, yeah, we're just kind of getting things wrapped up for the winter and lots of projects to work on over the rainy season.
Great. Thank you. Um, is there public comment on the miscellaneous planner item? To call for public comment?
I'm wondering about that. Evelyn said that it wasn't an option for the last meeting, but the circulation element is outdated. And a lot of what we're talking about has to do with ingress, egress, coming into town and things like that. And so that's one thing I was hoping, I'm just bringing up the planning commission because I'd like for it to be on the agenda for the council because it hasn't been, I don't want to say prioritized, but there's a lot of things to do, but that's a pretty critical issue for a lot of folks and just this town and the nature of the town is the circulation of date. And so with some of these developments that we're talking about, there's inconsistency there, which is back to kind of the cumulative effects area that I was sort of talking about. Cumulative effects include traffic, transportation, that kind of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie, go ahead. This is public comment on miscellaneous planner items. Go ahead.
Yep, I'm on track with you guys, and thank
Cool.
you for allowing a little bit more time. And I appreciate Mandy just bringing up those two simple things, the truck route and the speed humps in front of the school. I know you guys are planning commission, so I did put a call into the county the week before. I said that at council earlier this week. I was really concerned about that spot that's developing across from Greenwood that car actually slipped in and had the wreck. I didn't want to jinx it, but I see they got some safety stuff out there, but maybe planning commission, staff, whatever, we got to work with the county, see if they can fix that up. The speed humps, thank you for marking them. Mandy, you just mentioned blue and gold, but the examples that you gave the school was blue and gold and then rainbow. And then they okayed it. They didn't really have any input. And it was also mentioned that was going to be being put up throughout the rest of town, the rainbow crosswalks as well. So you did mention as well that we had to be really careful about that because we didn't want to have any ADA compliance issues with it. So maybe as we move forward with that, we could actually have a presentation at Planning Commission, I guess is what I'm asking. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Julie.
That was my car that slipped in there, Julie.
Oh,
Was it?
oh my
It was,
gosh.
yeah.
Oh, so sorry. Oh, no.
Just the tables are high enough that they, it came up to the curb. I was so used to pulling in without the table there that when I pulled in, I just went, they just kind of went off the thing. So,
Oh, I think she was talking about the drainage ditch
oh,
across the
oh, that one,
boulevard.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, this is another thing I have.
Okay. Oh no.
Okay.
Oh,
And the just so you know, the crosswalks, the reasons why we can't do the rainbow one is we just couldn't get the paint. So they'll both be the school colors, which was what the school chose.
Okay. Great. All right. Our next item is our meeting dates for the next 3 months, December 16th, January 20th, and February 17th. I won't be here for the December 16th meeting. And then January 20th, is that around MLK Day? Is that going to be a holiday and potentially problematic for anyone? Probably.
Gary always has his meetings on
Okay.
holidays.
Right, it's a regular
Yeah,
time.
it's
Okay.
supposed to change it.
That's fine. Okay. And then I won't be here on the 17th of February either.
oh, here, something better.
Okay, sorry. So you were
So December 16th, I won't be here, or February 17th. It sounds like none of the three of us would be here for February 17th. So that one for sure should probably be changed.
we'll plan ahead to do it.
February. Okay. Um, and yeah, I mean, I'll be here for MLK Day, so January 20th is fine. Just want to point that out. And then do we have any under like AB, what is it, 2449 about zooming in for commissioners under just cause or anything? Is there any option where I could zoom
There,
in?
yeah, there's some limited
Right. It's only supposed to be
parameters.
emergencies, I guess. So
Yeah,
this is pre-planned travel,
unless you
so I
want
guess
to
it wouldn't
make
work.
your location public, and I
Right,
mean,
right.
no one's going to show up.
Right, right, right.
You know?
No, and I guess I don't think it qualifies actually. I think it's supposed to be like an emergency or a medical thing. So it's pre-planned vacation, so that doesn't count. Okay. So no, so yeah, I won't be here on December 16th. I was willing to zoom in on my vacation, but
Oh man.
just all right. Great. So we'll reschedule those at a later meeting date, and then we are ready to adjourn. Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone.